Hey, Paul.
Hi, Ryan.
Well, congratulations, first of all, man, on the film. It's really something special. Yeah, right? Give it up. Raise the roof. I guess I'll start at the very beginning. Probably a pretty generic question, but I am curious. Like, what was the very first kind of embryonic germ that this story started with for you?
Well, it's never just one. Maybe it's a couple. Maybe I can remember having an impulse of wanting to make a relationship movie, a man and a woman, just kind of something simplifying down to that. But that's very broad and generic, I suppose, but a good way to get started. I had been ill in bed one night, really sick, and my better half looked at me with a love and affection that I hadn't seen in a long time. I thought, wow, well that's kind of interesting, I really need her to get me soup right now, and she looks like she's enjoying it, So that's kind of maybe one silly thing, but mixed in with that was wanting to work with Daniel again. And I think the other thing that happens as you're laying around on your couch watching TCM is that, Rebecca comes on or something like that, and those movies that we all love, and you think, God, that looks good, So I'm a fan of those types of, those gothic romance kind of movies. It's romance stuff the way that Hitchcock did it as well, which is, you're never really supposed to say his name out loud. But,
like Macbeth, you mean? Is it now cursed?
Well, no, yeah, exactly. Well, it's kind of like, if you say you want to do something like Hitchcock, you just shouldn't say that. You shouldn't say that. But I suppose, the romance that is it was particularly in Rear Window. I remember that great moment when Jimmy Stewart's watching Grace Kelly take the plunge and go across the street, and he just has this look in his eyes like, that's my girl, he's so in love with her. And I guess it's that kind of combination of that fever and romance that can happen when you look at somebody, and it's kind of gothic and crazy, and it appeals to me. So Daniel and I just started writing based on a few of those different things.
Yeah, I mean, hearing you talk about this film a little bit, it sounds like, you guys were really partners in making it. It sounds like it went back to the start with writing, and I'm curious how that worked, and then, I'm also curious, I don't know if there's an actor working today who has kind of the mythos around him with the public that he does. So I'm just curious about your on-set, how you guys work on set. Is it just the actual process? Do you rehearse previously with the other actors? I just laid like 3 questions in a row.
Well, no, well, Daniel's Daniel, and he's a powerful presence. He's a great collaborator. So that collaboration, because we'd done it before, I talked to him about working together and doing something, and I had a few ideas, and I figured it would be we figured why don't I share material with you as I go, rather than kind of go away and write for a year and have some big Shazam moment where I sort of show it to you. We need to do this together. And that proved really helpful because he was able to go away, and speaking to the sort of mythological sort of proportions of preparation he does, is that he wanted to learn how to sew. He wanted to get as close as he could to the apprenticeships that have to happen if one is a couturier. And then that means something. There's a very famous story that Givenchy studied under Balenciaga, 2 great designers, and Balenciaga was known as a great sewer and had studied since he was an infant, basically, and apprenticeships would last 10 years. And Givenchy said to Balenciaga, "How can I be like you, master?" And he says, "Well, you can't. It's too late for you." In other words, if you haven't done that and you're already on your way, forget that. So Daniel, knowing that, still tried to do what he needed to do, which was one of his missions was to sew 100 buttonholes. Which he did, and just to learn the basics, so he didn't, so he knew what he was doing, what it felt like to touch these needle and thread so intimately and all that. But the process of writing was, it was just all these back and forth, you know. I would write and I would give it to him. He would come up with some ideas. I would go back and write. Really just a proper collaboration, sometimes over the telephone, sometimes in the same city. But what could happen while we were doing that was getting to learn what neither of us knew much about at all, which was the world of fashion in the 1950s, particularly dressmaking and how that goes. How do they make it? How does it work? How is it bought? How is it sold? What do they start with? Do they start with the inspiration from a piece of fabric, from a muse? You know, and we learned as we wrote as we learned. And sometimes our writing would get ahead of our learning. I would kind of be writing things that I didn't even know if it made sense, but I hoped it might, and then you'd find some thing that was in the research to say, oh, you know, I guessed right, or your instincts were taking you away. As far as rehearsal goes, Daniel does not like to rehearse. There's a very simple blocking on the day, just this sort of basic idea of where everybody might go, and then we really just shoot and shoot and shoot. He's very particular about talking about things, and that's what this year-long sort of writing process was like, just talking everything through, so that really when we get to the set, there's not much dialogue, there's not much. Really the extent of the directing with Daniel that day was just sort of going to see what wardrobe he'd picked out, and he'd sort of be like this jacket or that jacket, and I'd be like, that one, you know, that was the kind of extent while we were doing it. And that's, you know, the first time that Reynolds and Alma are on screen is the first time that they met outside of one small casting session that we'd had.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, we, you know, we had to do fun stuff like that, you know, to keep it interesting, and yeah.
One tiny little thing I wanted to ask you about in that scene, and it's so beautiful and magical, that scene, for a lot of reasons. There's like the sensuality of the food, the way it's shot. Their first conversation, which is so powerful, I didn't realize until the second time I saw it, and I only realized it intellectually as a line cross. Right?
Yeah.
And that is magical to me, that it feels so right. And that's a beautiful thing I want to take and put in my back pocket if anyone ever gives me shit about crossing the line.
Yeah, I know. It's you know, for this, the Directors Guild, you know, when you cross the line, you just get those eyes on set like, you know, and
especially with the British crew.
Absolutely.
Are you sure you want to do that?
Yes, they're very passive aggressive about it, or very aggressive about it. Script girl nodding in the corner like, you're not gonna call me when you're in the editing room and you script. But that was a classic situation of when you go to do something like that you feel incredible confidence in. Yeah. Technically, I suppose you sort of feel confidence just because you're looking at it and you see that they're both in the frame and you have this gut instinct that's going to work. Yeah. And you go with it. And then the next day, panic takes hold and you say, well, just in case, why don't we, you know, which is that horrible sinking feeling. And then, of course, you do it on the right side of the line. The performance is not as good. Nothing's as magical. It's all just kind of a waste of like an hour. And then you get to the editing room and you write letters to everybody and you say, I told you so.
Which is always the best feeling. Do you, how do you work with, I'm going to come back to, I want to talk about the two other actors in it, Vicky and Leslie, but, real quick, a tangent, in terms of the camera, do you board? Do you shot list? Do you come to the day and look at the blocking and figure it out? How do you work now? And how is that different from how you've worked in the past?
I think in the past when I started out, I was usually the youngest person on the crew, so I felt like I needed to be an overachiever and shot list or storyboard particular sequences out, which I would still do if there was an enormous amount of physical effects or something like that. But for the most part, a lot of it happens in scouting for us, like scouting locations over and over again, and to get at least, here's some really good ideas, but without Daniel and the actors being there, let's leave it open to see what might happen. And it's really sort of running through with my assistant director, usually just like, here's one way it could go, here's another way it could go, and inevitably, you know, sometimes those guesses are right. Mm-hmm. Other times Daniel will come in with an idea that's completely left field and great, and, or not. And so it's sort of planned instinctuality, I suppose, you know, and I've had enough great moments where you didn't know what was going to happen, and something great happened, and enough moments where you think, let's just be loose about it, and you just flounder out there without half a good idea or anything. And those are always rough, and it makes you think, maybe I'll come up with a shot list tomorrow, and just to sort of get some confidence back. Yeah.
I love the credit, it's lighting cameraman, right?
That's right.
Very British credit, yeah. And I know there was, some, talk about how, in terms of the cinematography, I know there was a misperception at the beginning of you, like, being the cinematographer, but hearing you talk, that's not really exactly the case. Talk about how you worked with the lighting crew.
Well, the guys I work with, Mike Bauman, Colin Anderson, Eric Brown, Jeff Kunkel, that's the sort of core group, first assistant camera operator, gaffer, and grip. And we worked on features when I worked with Robert Elswit together, and we've done a lot of smaller side projects between features, and it was a really nice working relationship that Robert couldn't do. So it was a really nice working relationship, and we felt confident that we could take that onto a larger scale and do it here for this. And you never know how it would have turned out if a proper cinematographer had been there. Obviously, it would have been different. Somebody else would have had a say and done some great things. But it was really nice to work with those guys, just because I like working with them. Yeah. And it worked. It worked. Of course, it wasn't without its hiccups, but the testing is the great solution. We just tested and tried to spend as much time as we could trying to find what we liked, how it looked. We used lots of old-fashioned stuff like low cons and smoke and all that kind of stuff, and just tried to find the ingredients that felt right to us. And inevitably, as that goes, you can test and test, but really after the first week, it starts to settle. You're like, well, we got a couple good things there. And if you're lucky enough, maybe you can go back and fix a few of your mistakes, which we were able to here and there. But,
do you watch film dailies with the crew? Or?
We do. Over in England, we had a little bit of trouble printing dailies. They don't do it there very often. Yeah. So that was, I don't know if you had that struggle or not. It was,
lab situation.
There's some lab situations there it's not like being in LA. Look, I loved shooting in London. I know you did too, but there's nothing like shooting here. It is absolutely heaven because all the pieces work. The labs are great, and it's just we've got it going on here. But that said, we would try to print dailies there. And if we weren't satisfied, we would send our negative back here and get some prints just to sort of really make sure we were on the right track. So we get them maybe every couple weeks. But we would go every night, as a group and do our telecine and look at it together, which is always, that's when you either are hanging your head low or you've got some real confidence going into the next day. Yeah. So. Daniel didn't but that was really just the crew. Usually the actors are invited, but mostly the actors that I work with choose not to come to dailies. Yeah. I don't know what your experience was, but lately the actors don't. They're like, I'm fine if you're happy.
It's weird. I've never done like projected dailies and watched it with the whole group. I've done just like it's terrible, but we all get them on the iPads. I scan it, but I typically don't. Yeah, but another very specific just shooting question. On set, do you, I'm assuming, for some weird reason, I assume the answer is no. Do you use playback much? Do you use a monitor? Are you up by the camera? What's your...
I like a very small monitor, cause they've just gotten bigger and bigger, and I think we were happier with something that was portable, not too small that you can't see it, and usually sort of shoved in a corner, usually for the script supervisor. I always find myself right next to the camera, but also there's that little onboard camera. I always I'm sort of kind of going back and forth between those two things. And try not to do playback too much because I know that can interrupt the flow. And I think particularly with Daniel, he doesn't want to hear his voice or he doesn't want to feel that sense of a bunch of people muddled around a monitor. But I've found that the further you get into the film, the more sort of playback comes into play because you are piecing something together that you do need to reference. But at the start, usually it seems like we're moving a lot without it.
Just flow. Going back real quick to the actors, how early in the process I guess you kind of answered the question with Vicky, and she's extraordinary, by the way.
Crepes.
Crepes.
Creeps.
Creeps. How early are the other actors involved? Do you know, how do you work with them if you've done all this preparation with Daniel in terms of prepping with them with this?
Well, yeah. So Daniel, obviously, we talked about that, and I didn't want to get into a situation. We were looking for an unknown. We were looking for something that we didn't know was out there, which was Vicky. But we started as early. We started maybe a year beforehand, a little bit less than a year, and the goal being like, I'd rather get my hands on this person if she's out there, so that there is the opportunity to get to know her. So it's, the worst situation would have been finding somebody and then starting the next day, and I think we found Vicky relatively early on. So I was able to get to know her for about 6 months before we started shooting. And the same thing goes for Leslie, we knew her work. And so we just called her and asked her if she was available and would she like to do it, which was really nice because we also knew that Leslie is an in-demand actress who's working a lot. So it's a double thing. You say, like, can you block out this time? And here's the script, so you can chew on it in your life for the next 6 to 9 months before we get going.
Did you with her, or do you ever have, well, I mean, I guess with your earlier films, you had like a group of actors you worked with regularly, but with a part like that, do you have her in mind when you're actually writing, or is it something where? I
think about halfway through, Daniel and I really started to have strong discussions about actresses that could play that part, and there was a lot of great actresses. If you're going to need to fill this part of an actress that age in England,
it's a bounty.
Vast, so Leslie, I knew from Mike Lee's films, but more specifically than anything was, as you do, you look people up online, and I saw just one photograph of Leslie that made me feel like, I mean, obviously she's great, but this is our girl. It was probably just some PR photo that she did promoting a movie or something like that. You saw those eyes and her skin, which is like a stop and a half brighter than anybody else's in the world, So it was like, just let's call her up fast and book her,
That's fantastic. And I mean, obviously the three main actors are amazing, but the faces and all the set kind of characters who are in the house.
Yeah.
Everyone, what's the name of the woman who's kind of the socialite woman who they have to dress, and she gets drunk? Barbara Rose. Yeah. The names in this also, if you just look at the credits list, until you had fun with the names. I mean, just extraordinary. But I guess that's the nice thing about being in England. You just have...
Well, Barbara Rose, the one American import.
Oh,
she's fantastic. Oh. She came over from New York for us. But everybody else, I mean, you've got Gina McKee, the great Gina McKee. You've got Julia Davis, Camilla Rutherford, and a few wonderful actresses that unfortunately we cut out. But, what you're talking about is a good thing too, is that trying to, the worst thing that can happen is when an actor, because we have a kind of an episodic structure, so you have actresses coming in for like 2 days worth of work. And the worst thing in the world is when you have maybe met that actress, maybe like for a half a second, and then they're there and they're expected to be great instantly. And we had a couple benefits. There was so many costume fittings that there was a lot of opportunities for me to go in and get to know these women closer rather than just meeting them to ask them to do the movie. So there was a good amount of time we got to spend with them, and they got to spend within the confines of the production. So that just makes it easier. I mean, I'd hate to be an actor who had to come in, for an afternoon, and suddenly be great. And especially opposite Daniel, he's very intimidating, I think, for some people. So, yeah.
I listened recently to the Paul F. Tompkins, comedy bit.
That's right. Exactly. Yes.
Anyway, how do you, in terms of your, the editing process, how do you work? Talk about how you work with Dylan, your editor, who you've worked with now for a long, long time.
Yeah. we, as simple as it sounds, we start at the beginning,
And you don't assemble during the shoot. You start after, or do you?
Yeah, he might noodle around, but I always sort of would go in there, and he was usually like playing around with color correction tools that he had and stuff like that. He was usually just kind of maybe like
page curl transition.
Yeah, exactly, like
starbursts.
diamond wipes and stuff like that. Just like messing around because the real, I think the joy that we have getting together is like, right. I mean, he's keeping an eye on things. He's there through production, not to cut things together, but to remind things from dailies. Like, do you just to guide the ship, just to making sure that the ship isn't an inch off mark so that we don't end up in Timbuktu. So that's really and the actual cutting, it's really fun. It's like just the two of us. Like, right, what's the beginning? What music do we have from Johnny to work with? Usually we have piano demos and one thing that we've learned over the years is like, don't get stuck. That was our motto. It was like, don't get stuck. Like, even if this is not the greatest scene in the world, keep moving, keep moving. So we just try to go really fast, not get stuck, not take anything too seriously, and just get to the end so we can sort of look, and see what we have. And things present themselves, I'm sure, as like pretty quickly, and you can get within striking range pretty quickly. And then the trouble starts, yeah. Which the trouble is usually the most fun. Is like, right, it can't be 2 hours and 30 minutes. It should be 2 hours. So now we've got to get it. So you get to 2:15. You go, so the next 15 minutes, how are we going to do it? And then you surprise yourself and you're like, we're at 2:08. What else can we get rid of? And then you find yourself going like, no, we're just cutting 2:00. What are we doing? What's the story we're telling? Let's stop. Everybody pause. And as the music is really informative for us of the editing, because it's, as you tell, it's full of music. So that process of cutting the movie and the music coming in or already being there is just so deeply tied together. Scenes that were became really good.
It's so married. I mean, with all your movies, the music is inseparable from the piece. So that was going to be my next question. So we had temp stuff from Johnny to work with. What other kind of things did you use other tracks also to kind of temp in, or did you mostly work with that? Or
no, we never used anything temp. We just had Johnny's demos, which were piano and sometimes his fake computer strings before we did the real thing. And then I had some music by Nelson Riddle and Oscar Peterson that does appear in the film that I wondered, will this end up in the film, or is this something that can inspire Johnny? And it ended up being in the film because it was something that it seemed foolish for Johnny to try to imitate or even be influenced by. It was its own kind of thing. And then we had, there's a great Schubert piece that was always really nice, and I thought for a second Johnny might do something there, but we decided we would need a break from what Johnny was doing just to keep it moving in slightly different ways. So yeah, that's kind of how it went. At this point with working with Johnny, that it starts as early as it would start with Daniel. As we were writing, I was telling him things. And
what were the conversations with him? What was the first kind of like,
I think I said, I think we should, romance doesn't really come naturally. I mean, he's in Radiohead, mopey comes naturally to him and sad. So I said, I know you have romance in you. So how can we let's try and find some stuff that we like, that we can listen to, that might feel that way. Or I was really obsessed with Passionate Friends, which we've talked about.
Which we watched actually the other night.
Did you like it?
It's extraordinary. Is there a good home video? We watched, we had to find it.
No.
I'm embarrassed of how we watched it because there's not a good release of it, right?
There isn't. It's a drag. It's a great film by David Lean that he made after Brief Encounter that, for whatever reason, nobody seems to know about it. Even like diehard aficionados of David Lean or anything. I mentioned this movie to Ryan. You're like, what are you talking about? And it's, No Coward wrote it, and it's got a great score, by who I'm blanking. But, anyway, that's a kind of classic English romance movie, and the score is it's big and overblown, and that's not really exactly what we wanted to do, but we're certainly like, let's grab some of that to put into this story. So those are some of the conversations, seeing that kind of stuff. There were conversations about trying to do something that might be kind of Eastern European for Alma. And then we said, well, she's Luxembourgish, so let's research some Luxembourgish music. It's kind of thin. It's like, we did, so, look, Luxembourgish music in the Wikipedia, it's like, there's ready to be filled in if anybody has anybody. But it led to, he had some melodies. He had Glenn Gould in mind when he was writing about Reynolds. That was something that sort of spoke to. He said he figured Reynolds would be listening to Glenn Gould. So there's the one main melody that we have in it, and we sort of he took a cymbal in and played it, which has a kind of vaguely Luxembourgish, European, German, French feeling, I guess. I don't know.
It's got that cascading. It's almost like
yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And does he? Did you record? Did you have stuff on set from him? If you get started that early, and does he then score specifically to the picture, or do you take his stuff and work it into the edit, and then
Yes.
Just in terms of how that works?
We don't have it on set, but I did give it to Daniel and Vicky to listen to. It was piano demos with the bad strings, like I talked about. And what we'll do is we'll sort of chop it up, and it's usually, let's say it's a 2-minute piece of music that has a melody in it and maybe some middle part or something. And laying it over 6 minutes will be great because he'll go, boy, that's repetitive. And then he'll kind of come up with ways to change it around and move it around. That's generally how we work. He's practically inept at scoring 2 picture. He can kind of do it if he's pressured into it, but he'd much rather kind of write a piece of music and then we'll chop it up. And then he'll kind of rescore. It's not how anybody should do it. But it ends up working somehow. It's like loads of versions and loads of cutting and pasting, and then by the time we get to, because we're so paranoid about spending money and at the scoring stage, by the time this horribly, like you'd not want to see the workflow beforehand, but by the time we get to the scoring stage, we have got because we don't want to embarrass ourselves in front of 50, Royal Philharmonic players. We have it figured out by then.
The other thing with the movie, especially having just spent a ton of time in London, it's you can feel how much you love London and love the city and deeply. And it's obviously you can see some of that comes out in movies, but obviously you capture the real place so well. I wanted to not really a directing question, but what's your relationship with London? Have you spent a lot of time there? What's your
I thank you for saying that because I do love it. I love it there. I don't know why. I mean, I'm from the Valley, but I love London. I have been surrounded by Brits by accident my whole life from my producing partners. Daniel and Joanne are British. My assistant director Adam is British. Johnny's British. It's just for whatever forces have come together in my life, I have this sort of connection to it over there. I've always wanted to work there, because of the films from there. Obviously, there's that draw as a film fan. You sort of know not just British films, but even other films that have shot in London. Star Wars being one of them, and on and on. And there's like a rich history there. It's kind of it's another version of Hollywood, I suppose. And it's also sort of maddening city to shoot in because it's one of those things I'm glad you said that about it because you drive through London and you think everywhere looks cinematic. Everything could be great, and you just are like, well, I've blown it, because every nook and cranny is great. But it's also incredibly built up, so hard to do without.
And it was all locations that you were filming. Did you build any sets, or was it all actually shooting at places? It
was shooting on location. We didn't build any sets, which might have been a mistake. I mean, we were really in the center of London. But it seemed a mistake to go to a set. Just because I think Daniel's and I as well, he really is obsessed with, let's go into the real thing, but the real thing comes with so many logistical headaches, a square that doesn't want you there, lunch breaks that happen outside your window when he's trying to give a tearful monologue to the ghost of his mother, all these kinds of things. You think, who the fuck fuck decide to shoot this in the center of London? This is such a bad idea. With no elevator, shooting on like the 4th floor, and like you just see like guys lugging lights up. They're like, this is not a fun movie to work on.
Well, thank you for going through all that, because it's an extraordinary film, man, and I think it's one that's I know it's gonna live in our hearts for a long while. Paul Thomas Anderson, give it up,
Thank you,
guys. Come
Ryan.
on.
Thank you very much.